So the last part of what we're going to learn today is how to follow up and to do documentation with your client. And so in your handout, this is very detailed because I actually use this when I'm doing documentation so I can make sure that did I hit all the high points? Did I ask all the questions? Did I include everything? So in your handout, instead of it just being a few words on a slide, everything that I tell you is going to be detailed in the handout. So when you're documenting, remember that your part of why we document is sadly is to mitigate risk, so that if there is ever a question on what we did we do everything that we knew how to do? So the first thing you would start out with is a history of suicidal behaviors, and this includes self-harm. So this is cutting, doing very dangerous things. And so what that would look like is client reports a history of suicidal behaviors. When he was 17 years old, he tried to, run his motorcycle off a high place or something like that. And he actually explained what happened in the incident, how was he treated, did anybody know about it? Or they've had numerous times when they were in the hospital or treated inpatient for suicidal ideation. This is what worked for them. So when you are talking to them, not only just what happened, but what was helpful, or sometimes what was not helpful, because, if you can learn from what was not helpful, then you wouldn't make the same mistakes and you might have a better outcome. The second part is detailing their current suicidal ideation. So this is where you say, about what the score is on the PHQ-9, where were they scoring high, what was their plan, what was their level of intent and preparation. And the AMSR training that we talked about at the beginning, that really goes into how to identify the level of intent or preparation. So, and part of that is just through the discussion. So this is the evaluation. What were the precipitating events? Did they have a fight with their parents? Was there a breakup? Was there a loss? So what you're trying to do with this is it's almost like you're writing a story. So giving kind of a story about what's going on. Here's the past. Here's what's going on now. Here's what we're going to do. And here's how we're going to follow up in the future. So also the clinical observations. So were they crying? Were they really anxious and shaking and sweating and, and kind of vibrating? What was happening physically in their body? Were they, having anger? What did that look like? And if you see anger, you might go back and look at homicidal ideation too, because, I remember one veteran, he was always homicidal. Like he was one moment away from somebody saying something that would just put him over the edge. And we worked a lot on mindfulness and changing the thoughts because that was homicidal ideation. Also the client's lack of improvement. So we've been working together for 3 months. Their depression level, their anxiety, their whatever has not improved, or they are not engaging in therapy. They're not doing any of the, maybe there was some work outside of therapy where they were, working on their negative thoughts, and they're just not working. So lack of improvement or lack of engagement, you need to list too, because what you're trying to show is these are the things that we've done, and they've been unable to gain these skills, or they're resistant, or they're just too depressed to do some of this. The third part is detailing risk and protective factors and any warning signs. So this is kind of where the safety plan is. So you can actually say we made a safety plan. It's uploaded in the documentation. But this lists long-term risk factors, demographics. It also lists where if the client has anybody close to them that has died by suicide, a grandfather, a parent, those are risk factors. And the potential triggers. So my mom takes away my phone. For some kids, that's a huge thing. They're about to lose their job. That's a risk factor. And then also list any underlying psychiatric disorders. So these can be anything medical. Do they have a life-threatening disease? Is there a grief and loss that is really significant? Have they had numerous losses? All of those things should be woven into the story. And again, when I talk about writing a story, I know some therapists are like, I just put the bare minimum in because I don't want to get in trouble. This is where you don't want the bare minimum because it needs to show that you knew what was going on, you have the history, and this is how you're trying to help. So that's where, and even if anything ever happens, saying, we had this training, I've been trained in these ways on access to lethal means and the training we're in, so that, you've done your due diligence to really do your best. Also, are there modifiable risk factors, such as are they on a medication that may cause suicidal ideation? You need to look at those meds. And do they need assistance in finding a job? Are they homeless? Are there do we need to attach them to some things? So those are things that can be changed. And, you list those. So they lost their job, and so there were some different ways that maybe they didn't know these other places where they could look for a job, and what are we doing to help encourage them to continue to look, or to connect them to people that can help them find a job. Also, we want to list the level of impulsivity and self-control. So if you have a person who is just very impulsive with, they have a history, and they can tell you stories about, yeah, one time I did this, and they're just extremely impulsive. Impulsive buying cars, impulsive marrying people, impulsive behaviors of any kind. Those are risk factors because when they're impulsive, they're more apt to do something that might be, that, they might actually, okay, Taylor, so we want to talk about the level of impulsivity and self-control. So really looking at how impulsive is this client in their behaviors in their past. So understanding if you see them buying cars, breaking up or getting married, or going on expensive vacations, or doing very impulsive behaviors of any kind, that's actually a risk factor, because then they're more apt to be impulsive about harming themselves as well. And another area is looking at substance use. And this can be anything from food to alcohol to drugs to prescription drugs, anything that they could be using, because we know that particularly with alcohol, the inhibitions to harm yourself go down, and you're more apt to engage in risky behavior. Another thing to record is their level of engagement and reliability. So are the people showing up for their appointments? When they come in, do they just sit there and you have to pull strings to get them to talk? Do they come in and really engage with you? So, client engages in each of our sessions actively and would like to learn things to get better. So actually documenting that they're engaged, or they are not very engaged, and they really have to be pushed to be engaged, or they're being forced to come here and they don't want to be here. So those are some things that are good for documentation, as well as any coping strategies. So these are things like, well, when I'm having a hard time, I go out with my friends, I call people, I go to the park where all the skateboard guys are, or what are they doing that are coping strategies? Another one that is really important to list and to talk about is, what keeps you from, in the past, from harming yourself? Well, I grew up in this church, and it's not okay, or our family, those are, you wouldn't kill yourself in my family. And so you really talk about that, because sometimes people can be very suicidal. They would never do it because their belief that they might go to hell, or not be able to see their family again is really bad. So that's a huge protective factor. So their faith life and turning and having a belief in something, no matter what it is. The fourth part of your documentation is a clinical response and intervention. So you think of, these are the things that we are going to do. So again, this includes the safety plan and any activities. And you actually write that, you created this safety plan, it's in the file, you gave them 4 copies, they're going to keep one in the car, give one to their mother, give one to their friend, and they're going to have one in their room. And they took a picture of it on their phone, and they thought the safety plan was a great idea, or they thought the safety plan was hokey. And you got to put that in there too, because if they're not bought into that, this is just one of the tools, one of many that we're going to use. And also, did you call anyone? Did you talk to anybody about the plan or their ideation, or is someone supposed to call you? So you want to document it and follow up with, if somebody was going to take their guns, who did they give them to? It's really helpful, and I've done this many times, is where it's like, do you think we could call your brother right now? And they'll call him and say, hey, I got you on speakerphone, that counselor I have, she's here, and we wanted to talk to you about holding my guns for a while. And, so that's kind of neat if you can engage with the family with that. But document what you've done, because if they end up with a gun, at least you tried. Or also document, they will not give their gun to anybody else. And then that they're at higher risk as well. And then detail what you're going to do as far as, here's this appointment where this is identified. What are we going to do now? And I usually see people at least twice a week during this time, sometimes 3 times a week. I know some people that will see clients every day. So, however you're set up, and also how acute the person is. I mean, I've seen people probably 3 days in a row, just to get them through that. And then talk about, the call over the weekend. And so all of these things need to be documented, because they're your story of how you're going to proceed. And it also helps you with your treatment plans, because then, if you have where you can actually list that they have suicidal ideation, and you have a program that shoots out all the ideas of things that you can do, but definitely put it in your treatment plan that they're at risk for, suicide, and this is how we're going to address it. What would be really bad is if people around them knew and they had told you and it doesn't appear in their treatment plan, it's nowhere in the documentation. It's like, where were you? So we should be asking, and know that sometimes they're not going to tell you the truth, and they're not going to say yes, because it just hasn't worked well in the past. So that's where, bud, let's do a safety plan anyway. Even if you don't think so, when those thoughts come up, I want to know that you have some tools to work with. So you kind of think about that. So that's how we document for mitigating risk. And in your handout, all of those things I talked about are listed. And I do have a copy of that in my office, that when I'm documenting, I put all those pieces in it, because it's that important to document. So we talked about negative responses, and those are not enough to actually determine suicidal risk. Remember to ask questions that are different, instead of, just asking if they're going to kill themselves, saying, well, how long have you been thinking about killing yourself? Because, if you know a client and they're at that point, sometimes what they're thinking. And they may correct you and say, no, I wouldn't kill myself, but I just am so in such a place that if I could kill myself, I would. And that's how they're in distress. Let's help them have a plan to kind of get out of distress. Okay? Because it's usually super time limited, and it's not forever. And you got to have this slide, because you know what? If we're not taking care of ourselves, there is no way that we're able to take care of our clients. So when we talk about meeting clients a couple times a week, like, I am in private practice and I have a very full practice, and I'm giving up some of my time to put them in. But where are we taking care of ourselves? So if we were in person, I would say, hey, when is the last time you had a massage? When was the last time you were exercising, or, doing swimming, doing something with your body that you really enjoyed? What's your self-care like? Is it burning a candle and reading your book, your enjoyable book? Is it going and spending time with friends? Is it resting outside on your, in your garden? What does self-care look like to you? And, we go over this all the time in training, self-care, self-care, self-care. But when we're dealing with people who are, highly fragile like this is the time when, I usually keep all my energy to myself, but this is a time when, it kind of depletes a little bit. And I have to really watch what I'm doing. So being careful yourself, and then also engaging with other therapists, other friends in, I need some self-care time, or consultation is another great place, because when we're in consultation with other people, we can be our authentic self and say, you know what, this is what was happening. I had somebody suicidal. These are the things that happened. How am I doing, guys? And if you're hearing another therapist talk about that, then you go back and say, well, how are you caring for yourself? Have you worked 5 days straight, 8 or more hours a day? And where did you take a break? And are you eating well? And are you taking care of yourself? Because when we have such a need for mental health professionals, we need to make sure that we're being taken care of so that we don't burn out. We do a lot of good work. So take your classes in self-care, but take care of yourself. I want to talk in some pretty good depth about some other resources that I want you to be aware of. And there's going to be other resources, especially in Texas, that may be different than what I'm aware of in Wyoming. But because they come out of national organizations, I think they're pretty similar across our states. So one of the first ones is the Zero Suicide Initiative. Now, how this is usually run is in a hospital or a big behavioral health center. And essentially what it looks like is that all of their practitioners are asking the PHQ-2, which are the first two questions, about interest, little interest or pleasure in doing things, and then have you felt down, depressed, or hopeless? And if somebody cues high enough on either of those, that goes into their medical record and goes out to somebody who's actually making follow-up calls. And it's usually a mental health professional. And that mental health professional follows up and calls. And actually on site, some of the doctors then, if it's high enough, will do the PHQ-9. And then, that mental health professional has access. And I don't have the exact data of what's going on in our hospital, but it is huge, the number of referrals that they've had to mental health. And then they connect with other mental health professionals in the area, because our behavioral health cannot handle all the calls. So that brochure I was telling you about earlier, they use that, and that's really important because they want to refer, they can't take all the calls, so they refer them out to other people in the community. So Zero Suicide starts usually in one facility, and once they get going, they start training people outside of there. So what that would look like is your eye doctor, your dentist, they would be asking the questions too. And they would be referring if there was an issue, because of the number of people who die by suicide who saw some kind of medical or professional person just prior. Whoever that is has a relationship with that person and can, assist them and encourage them to get some help. So Zero Suicide, you can go online. These websites have so much information about what they're doing, toolkits, free resources. So Zero Suicide would be one. And that's initiatives that are, has started in the last couple of years and are really going. So we want to know about them and be connected with them. And then if you're a mental health professional in private practice, you want to connect with your Zero Suicide people, because they can refer people to you. So that's about Zero Suicide, and the website and everything again is in the resources. The Butterfly Project is another one that I really kind of encourage people to look at. So what it is it's a way to address self-harm. So any kind of cutting, doing eraser marks, whatever that is, that's actually kind of a cry for help. And it is absolutely a predictor of potential suicidal ideation. And so addressing cutting in a different way is huge. So you can, and this is usually happening, the cutting stuff in adolescence, it's learned from other people. And so what we have are these bags, and they have some little things in them. The main important thing is they've got a permanent marker in the bag. And they've got some things like rubber bands or soft, fuzzy things and journals and the suicide prevention hotlines and other things. But what you do with the butterfly project is you take the permanent marker and I mean, hopefully I can remember exactly how this goes, but you have them draw a butterfly on their arm. Or I've had a couple of butterflies drawn on my arm because when they're really hopeless, I'm like, okay, well, do you want to draw it on my arm? And then I draw one on their arm, and it's done with a permanent marker. And then you name the butterfly. So my butterfly I named after the person that drew it on my arm. And I say, I'm not going to wash it off and scrub it off. I'm just going to let it wear off naturally in the shower and as I go to day. But when I see that butterfly, I'm going to think of you. And so they would name that butterfly after someone that cares for them and wants them to be okay. So whether it's a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, and they just name it some other thing, and that's their butterfly. And what they did in the drawing it on their arm is instead of cutting, there's actually a sensation that happens when you're drawing it on your arm, and it's purposeful. And you're not allowed to cut until the butterfly wears off. And then hopefully we can draw another butterfly on. So in working with this, and the kids that I've worked with, they're like, hey, can I have a couple more of those bags? Because, I've got some friends that cut. And I'm like, well, sure. And our suicide prevention team is actually putting together all these bags and getting them out to mental health professionals free. So I don't have to go order all the stuff. I just got these bags and I can give them to people. And we give them to schools too, so that they can give them to the kids. And then that awareness of somebody's got a butterfly, only usually it's covered up. It's their personal butterfly that they know about. So it is one way, one tool of addressing that self-harm. So you can look at that and kind of explore what the butterfly project's all about. Another one is, and this is really important, but clinicians as survivors. So, I have the Survivors of Suicide Loss support group for loved ones who's lost someone by suicide. But the bottom line is if we work in this long enough, we're going to lose a client. And when I talk about, and I haven't lost one, I always use the word yet, because, as much as I try and as much as I've learned, none of us are perfect. And, there's going to be a time when we're going to lose somebody. And at that moment, our own self-care and our own strength and ability as a clinician to reach out and to get support is going to be important. So if there was a suicide loss, particularly in a facility that has many layers of people, and there's going to need to be some looking into why did that person die by suicide, we need to make sure that that is not a punitive reaction, that clinician is being supported and cared for, because they're going to be hurting. This isn't something like you're going to have a disciplinary thing because you lost somebody by suicide. No, it's a time for us to learn. And it's not a public time where we all get together, all the employees, and we talk about my client that died by suicide and what I was doing. No, this is a private consult time to really work with, a couple of your colleagues to kind of unpack what went on so that we can learn for future, working with future clients in our practice, but also in, the other people that were working with us, and talking about, then they're going to learn more as well. And this is an online place where there's some blogs and there's some support directly online. So if you don't have a bunch of people that help you during this time, that you get help, because this is a time when we sometimes also do not go to the funerals. So that's a whole nother, what do you do afterwards? And I think if you were invited to a funeral by the family, and they had worked with you and they knew you and you felt comfortable going, you could do that. But I think you also need to check your risk insurance people and they will help you. Is there going to be any liability associated? It's okay to call the risk people. I've done it before myself and have been like, wow, I felt super supported. They gave me information I never would have known. So if you lose someone by suicide, if you're not invited to the funeral and we typically don't go, and you don't want to have a bad reaction there. But if the family was close, they ask you, consult with, people in a consult group, call your insurance and make decisions, because what you do at that time also determines what kind of risk. And if you go to the funeral, then you might document, that the family asked me because we had worked so closely together and they knew I was in pain too, that they asked me to go to the funeral and I did, but I didn't go to the stuff afterwards because that would have been awkward. And if you document that in there, then that helps you with some risk stuff as well, because families are going to be hurting at this time and everybody wants to point a finger at whose fault it is, when really, you typically can't just say whose fault it is. So we want to take care of people who've lost loved ones by suicide, but also clinicians. So the information for this is there, as well as lots of areas of support through this website. And the next thing I want to talk to you about is kids and electronics. So this Dana Boyd talks about kids aren't addicted to technology, they're addicted to getting together. And this has to do with social media. And I actually have a couple of books that I've included in the references that have to do with technology. And there's a man named Colin Karchner, and he actually talks in the schools about social media and the connection to depression, anxiety, and suicide. And he is just excellent. And so he's got lots of TED Talks, and some of his school assemblies are uploaded on YouTube. And if you just listen, try and find the longest one and listen to it. It is absolutely amazing, because it's like this guy is telling the truth of what we know, but he's actually able to tell you and show you what is the effect of the social media and the screens on our children. And he talks about a therapist who, before seeing young people, asking them for, 30 or 40 days to be off of social media. And typically those kids never have to come see him, because by the time they're off social media for 30 or 40 days, all of that peer pressure and ugliness and, you're being secluded from a group because you see pictures of everybody else doing stuff and you're not having that much fun. When they get off of there and they're not exposed to that depression and anxiety goes away. So really understanding where young people are with their journey with social media. And what social media is we get together. So kids used to get together in the park after school or on sports teams or wherever else. And they're not getting together in the largest rates than they ever have before. They're going home and being isolated, and their connection is getting on social media. But if we could help people get together in person, there's so much, it's just so much more healthier. The two books that I recommend, one is called Glow Kids, and it's the effects of social media and screens on our children developmentally. It was extremely hard for me to read, because there is so little that I'm able to do as a person with social media. And I don't even have little kids in my house, but I do have grandkids. And it is so hard to realize what's going on and to really read this. It's a hard book. And the other is Selfie, which is, it talks about how, we put stuff online. Some people put on when they get up in the morning and they look terrible, but most people are like, this is my perfect family and this is my perfect vacation. And then the rest of us are looking at them like, I didn't have a perfect vacation, especially because it's COVID. So I did not go anywhere, but everybody else is having fun but me. And so we compare ourselves. And then women and young girls especially we compare each other on how we look. Well, she's skinnier, or she's got a cuter outfit. And, so it's just adding, to what we usually do in person and just making it worse. And being online, that there's so much more bullying and people say things that they would never say in person. So please be aware of that with our young children. This is a whole nother huge area of things that we need to look at and address. And I think that with COVID, that being home and parents trying to work, there's been such an increase in the use of social media and games and gaming. So, that's kind of a scary thing. And speaking about gaming, realize if you are working with people who have gaming addictions, that there is something called, I think it's gaming dysphoria. It's something where they come into your office and they're looking around and they're still in the game. They're not in your office. So if you're working with people like that, really look into where's the reality, because in the games they're killing themselves and they get killed, and being aware of the extent of gaming and what kind of games they're playing. So if it's Minecraft, it's like, okay, but are they playing the ones where they shoot each other, World of Warcraft, those type of things. Even Second Life would show you that they're trying to connect with people. And Second Life is like a platform where it looks like the world, and you walk around the world and you shop and you do things. But there's a lot of really deviant things that go on there too. But there again, it's people trying to connect with each other instead of, you and I going out and let's go for a walk. We're walking online together. And even though that sounds lovely, like we're still connecting, we're not in each other's space, and we are not together. So be aware of the lack of people actually being in each other's, and I call it being in communion with people, where you're actually there, you're interacting and you're having fun and you're together and you're playing and you're sharing and you're encouraging. And, I think that has a lot to do with our rates of suicide. So let's talk about some of the stuff we learned and just kind of review. We learned about why, and you learned about why it was super important to me, what suicide prevention looks like in my community life, but also in my private practice, and why this is important on a nationwide and statewide level and even a local level. We talked about the risks of and meeting ethical responsibilities of documenting and doing a good safety plan and following up. And remembering too that as we're following up with people, that we're not just following up a little bit. After, say, we have a couple weeks of working on the suicidal ideation, at the end of it, you keep talking about it and don't stop, because it's not just you do 1 or 2 appointments and we're done, but we keep talking about it to help them, understand that we are here to help you along, and we're not going to let this go by just having one appointment where we talk about suicide and we don't do it again. So be sure that you're following up over time. And then you learn the nuts and bolts of working with students with or clients with suicide, and following up and documentation, all the other resources. I want to point out too that all of the things are in your handouts. So, you've got everything from like Zero Suicide with the link that you can go to their website, all of those things. So you have a whole bunch of things. I had one more thing I was going to share with you. There is a new CDC report that came out, and they're reporting that 1 in 4 young adults are considering suicide due to the coronavirus pandemic. So as much as we think, oh, we are almost done, right now we're seeing, because of the pandemic, so much more referrals to mental health. And even in our schools here, they had 7. Now I know this is probably going to sound small, but we're a town of 12,000 people. But they had 7 suicide risk assessments in the first 3 days of school and in the high school. And that's very substantial. They usually don't get that in an entire year. So we're looking at some very, very different times that we're working in. So being very, I'm sure we'll have some other sessions that have to do with the pandemic and working during this time of very much unrest, but realize that it's affecting our clients and our communities, very strongly. So I just want to say thank you for attending, and I appreciate your sticking with me during these 3 hours, because I know it's long, and I know this is just an overview, and there's so much more to learn. But if you have any questions, there's my email address, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Or if you want one of the handouts, or you can do it electronically and pick off any of those things and use them, please do. Or search online for safety plans. There's tons of them out there. And we also have all of the references that we use. Some of your big organizations that, if you're working with suicidal people, that are going to be the most helpful with references is the American Association of Suicidology. They're the people that do the research. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So these are the people that are helping all the prevention teams around the country with resources and training and what do you do. And then the Education Development Center that has the CALM training, and so those are some of the big ones that are doing the research, and there's so many more out there. The Trevor Project, there's some that are related to very special tribal or sexual preference, those type of things, so be aware that those resources are out there too. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.